Welcome to Correctional Commentary, a podcast about the ins and outs of corrections, an uncensored view from behind the walls. Hosted by Robby and Caleb.
Hi, welcome to episode 3 of Correctional Commentary. I am your host, Caleb, along with my wonderful and phenomenal co-host, Robby. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the first of corrections. Robby, how do you want to start this episode off? How do we want to get into this?
I think we'll start just this episode. We want to focus on like what you said the first, and that's gonna be everything down to we touched on the last episode of walking into a pod and the door slamming behind you. It's going to be a lot of stuff like that.
It's an interesting sound, isn't it? That first door slam behind you.
Yeah, for sure. But we're going to focus a little more on first of after you've gotten out of the academy and you're basically on your own. Your first 2 weeks, it's your OJT period, which is on the job training. And
now, for our listeners out there, the OJT period is not necessarily always 2 weeks. That was just for our agency.
Okay.
It can be different. You might be on OJT for 3 months. You might be on it for a year. It varies. So don't take our 2-week time frame as solid.
Well, the OJT is a little different from your probationary period. It's your OJT is just to where you're basically shadowing, like we touched on job shadowing. It's a little more in-depth version of job shadowing to where you're actually doing the job and you have another officer or even a corporal or a sergeant there with you. So you're not making all the decisions by yourself.
Yeah. It's almost like you have a safety net there with you. That's kind of how mine was. I was essentially given the tools. Go nuts. Don't let anybody die. Keep everybody inside the fence. If you need me, I'm going to be sitting here in the office with my feet kicked up. So good luck. That's kind of what I got.
And that's kind of what you need too. And if you start, if for some reason they start hearing a lot of yelling out there, and they step out and they pretty much step in from there.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll start with probably one of the most important things in our job description is our first count.
Oh, God.
For anybody that doesn't know anything about corrections, they harp on it, especially going through the academy. Our most important job that we have is count time.
And for those listening, no, you cannot use your fingers and toes. I tried that once and I got in trouble, so don't even think you can.
Yeah, and man, count procedures can change so drastically from facility to facility.
They can change day to day. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, like working at the few different facilities that I'm at, every single one of them do it differently, and it's relatively annoying. But some of them are better in certain ways. Some of them are kind of like pointless. But I think it's the childishness that is going on in it.
Oh yeah.
Like they started painting red or yellow X's on some of the facilities that I'm at to make it to where, hey, this is where you have to stand while you're verifying count.
What?
Yeah, because we've had officers get in trouble for sitting in the chair, spinning around, watching, doing a cover count, and that's just something you can't do.
Yeah.
So like they kind of had to, administration kind of had to treat everyone like children. Like, hey, this is where you have to stand.
Like I explained to you, like I think I said in the last episode about kindergarten, like your first day. It's one of those things.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that's our first.
Yep.
And probably it's one of the most important ones because that's going to be where you're going to make sure you don't have anybody overdose, trying to hang themselves,
escaped.
Yeah, escape. That's the big one. But and that's I harp on a lot of the new guys whenever they come in with me.
Mm-hmm.
I've found a lot of inmates playing on phones, sharpening knives
Oh, lovely.
during time. So
Just cute.
I see them trying to rush through it. Slow down,
Yeah.
because unfortunately you're going to see some stuff that you don't want to see.
Yeah.
You're gonna see inmates using the bathroom. That's just part of it.
You might see
But
their blanket rising and falling right around their crotch area. Don't ask questions. Just keep going. Just
yeah, but it's also a really good opportunity to figure out which one of your inmates are junkies.
yeah. Yeah. It most definitely
Because
is.
you'll be able to tell if you've never seen anybody tweaking out on drugs. You're going to see it your first day in prison. I promise you.
Yeah, and that is really an understatement. If you make it, I would say 10 hours. Well, the average shift in correction for our listeners out there, most of the time it is 12 hours. But if you make it, so I'm going to say if you make it 10 hours out of that 12 without seeing some kind of interaction with drugs, you're doing really good for yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
you are doing really
Well,
good. You might want to go play a scratch or lottery ticket.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that kind of varies on facility, because the one
Right.
like that we met at, I mean, we had, I would say, almost complete control
Yeah.
of
And I can tell
to
you
to
what
an extent. To an extent. I mean, that's like my first cell search that I did.
Mhm.
My first real cell search that I did was probably at the facility that I met you at on my second hire in, and that's
Yeah.
where I learned a bulk of my stuff from, was just the seriousness of it. Because back whenever the first time I hired in 2014, the everything was a little more laid back, and if
Mhm.
something happened, we could handle it without as much.
Bureaucratic bullshit. Let's just call it what
Mm,
it is. The government is really good at taking something very simple and making it a lot more complicated than what it needs to be. And the correction system is no exception to that, unfortunately.
yeah, so like my first altercation on my first hire in was a whole lot different than my second time hiring in with the state
Yeah.
was than my first facility. Because my first facility, it was a max facility, so your altercations are going to be a little more violent at a max
Hmm.
facility. Um, so I had an inmate. We were escorting to the shower, and he had he was cuffed. And whenever we escort max inmates, they're cuffed and shackled, and we walk them. When they get to the shower, we reach down, we take off their shackles, put them into the shower. Then there's a hole that you can take their cuffs off of, and so they're not shackled until after they come out of the shower. So that's probably one of the most dangerous parts in a max unit. So my first, I guess, altercation slash like slight use of force
Yeah.
was we had that inmate stepped out and just headbutted my partner that I was working with, and just took off running.
Yeah.
And granted, and yeah, we'll go ahead, man.
Well, play stupid games, win stupid prizes in that particular. Because I have a feeling what I know the end result's going to be for you guys are going to bless him with a touch.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, most of the time, most of the time. All right, sorry guys, we had to take a quick break. We're back. Just so everybody knows, all of our videos, they're unfiltered completely. We don't edit them. So if there is a quick break, that's why. So we're going to jump back into the use of force that I was in, where, and this kind of just goes to show you not all use of forces are as extreme
Mm-hmm.
or maybe even as necessary. The So he was running around. He was only cuffed behind the back. My officer was on the ground because he got his nose broke. And pretty much with that, all you had to do was grab the inmate because he was cuffed behind the back. And we made him eat concrete a little bit.
You blessed him with
Uh,
touch, is as what I
yeah.
would say.
Yeah.
Um,
So, I mean, and even whenever they're cuffed and shackled, I mean, that incident still could have happened.
oh yeah, I
Just
mean,
that's just the simple matter of the fact. So that was my first use of force, and that one happened within my first 3 months at the maximum security prison,
see,
and I haven't had one in a long time since that I was directly involved in. Now I've responded to a lot of officer needs assistance, and I don't really consider that as a direct use of force of for me.
see,
Um,
that's where you and I differ. Anytime I am directly involved with blessing an inmate with touch or going hands on in any kind of capacity, that's the use of force. I don't give a shit what reason I'm there for, because either way, it's on like Donkey Kong. They're not going to say, "Hey, will you step aside so I can get to that fucker right over there?" No, it don't work that way. Um, you're coming after him, you got to get through me, and I promise you, I'll beat the hell out of you. One of the
well,
two things is
well,
going to happen.
well. What I mean by a direct use of force is there is a lot. You're going to find a lot of officers in this field that are just gung ho to
Oh,
get into a
yeah.
use of force, and I would say at least 90% of the use of forces that happen could be de-escalated to where nothing needs to happen.
See,
And I've I'm a prime example of just being beat up. Man, I've got two ruptured discs on my spine. I've
mhm.
had spine surgery. It's just a part of it.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And listeners, that is something that for those listeners that are thinking about a career in corrections, and it is for another episode, but I just want to briefly touch on it. That is kind of the unspoken side of corrections. There is physical and emotional effects of the job. I've broken my hand in the job. I have done all kinds of damage to my body just doing my job. It wasn't necessarily intentional. It wasn't like it was planned, but it happened, and it does stick with you. When I first started in this, I was 21 years of age, and I was full of piss and vinegar and thought I could take on the world. And now I'm not going to tell you how much older, but I'm definitely a lot older than what I was, and I'm starting to feel the effects of the job.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't my first cell extraction that happened in, but I've been in upwards of probably 30 cell extractions, and the one that got me was I had an inmate. He was standing on his bunk whenever I went in, and
Now,
I
really
was
quick,
I was
was
the
he in a
first.
single man cell or was he in a double man cell? You just have to pull
Oh,
one.
it was a single man cell, so in a maximum security facility, the only you're only ever going to have one inmate in a cell.
Right.
They're locked down 23 hours a day. The only time they step foot outside their cell is to go to the shower or to go to the rec yard.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the rec yard, they're in a metal cage.
Yeah.
So I had this inmate. This wasn't so. All right. Well, let me back up because we're trying to stay to the first. My first cell extraction I was the shield. I don't even remember what they're called. We just call them the shield. I don't know
Nova
what they're
shields.
called by the
I think they're
book.
called Nova shields or something. They're electronic. They're basically taser shields. It's what they are. I
Well,
mean,
no, I'm
that's what
talking about like the formations that you go in.
oh, the stack
That
formation.
they yeah. But
Yeah,
anyways,
front
I was
man.
the shield. Yeah,
Yeah,
front man. There you go.
yeah, front man.
So this inmate, he had two knives. Um, they were probably
Skeleton.
about 8 to 10 inches long. The blades, and he had them strapped around his wrist
Oh, so he
so
was
he
going
couldn't
like,
drop them. Yeah.
yeah.
So
That's what we
talk
call
about
inmate
a
suicide bomber.
yeah. So talk about wake up call there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So we go in, and it's kind of. Well, I tell you what, if you want an adrenaline rush, cell extraction is the way to go
And see, Robbie,
because
that's where you and I differed. You did formal cell extractions. I
mm,
did what I call informal because I didn't do my first quote unquote cell extraction until I went to the sheriff's office, and we didn't have a cell extraction team. It was just whoever was
well,
on shift at that moment.
I mean that was us. I mean at the Max facility, we didn't have a formal team either.
Oh, you
They
didn't?
just
Okay.
pulled off shift.
I got you.
So usually it was the biggest guys there. We suited up, and all we had was they had motorcycle helmets. They put gloves. We had a jumpsuit. They gave us knee pads, elbow pads, so whenever we go down. But this guy, he was wild and taking him down. Man, I went down and I was hurting for a few days after, and then
Oh,
I finally went to the doctor, and that's where I found out that I had a ruptured disc, and I was fighting that for a little while until I finally started to lose mobility in one of my legs.
yeah.
So
The first 24
so
hours
that
after initial contact's always the greatest because you don't feel shit. Your adrenaline's still running. And then after that, you start crying.
oh, I wouldn't even say that. I would say your first man. I'll tell you what. You get into a use of force, or your first officer needs assistance.
Oh God,
The
yeah.
amount of adrenaline that runs through you
It's just
is
one giant.
absolutely insane, and
Oh, 100%.
it makes you exhausted after.
Oh yeah.
It's
It'll tire you out. It's one of the reasons I didn't mind having use of force at the end of my shift because I knew I could go home. But
yeah,
if I had them at the beginning of the day, I was cussing the entire day because I became sleepy.
yeah. But the my first cell extraction, it ended up good. No staff got hurt.
Which is
He
always a good
was
thing.
Yeah, the inmate had some bumps and bruises mainly because he hit the concrete several
Mhm.
times pretty hard.
Yeah.
I mean, which I'm sorry,
Oh,
that yeah, that circles back to fuck around and find out. And whenever you
you
try
tried to
to
you
hurt,
tried to keep him from
yeah,
falling, but some bitch was just determined to fall on that fucking concrete. God bless him. Some people's children, let me tell you.
oh, but like what you said, cell extractions are not as common anymore.
Yeah.
Like since I hired back with the state back in 22, I haven't been into a single cell extraction.
Really.
Hasn't even really been kind of close for some reason, and it's just like
Even with your new
it's
position,
all
you've not over at
yeah.
least overseen any?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Okay.
It's weird because they were so frequent and common.
Yeah.
We were having at least one or two a night. Not that I was directly involved with, but just in
Right.
general. But it's almost like it's kind of like with law enforcement on the street. You know, everyone's afraid to get into use of forces because you're in the public's eyes.
Hey man, I'm guilty of that same mentality. One thing that they preached to us in the academy was be aware of excessive force. So before I ever used force, I made sure, like triple checked in my brain
Yeah,
that
and
I
all
was
and
just
all you guys coming in. I mean, anything you do can land you in court.
yeah, yeah.
And
Uh,
whenever you go into court, I mean, there's if you're in the right,
mhm.
then the state DA, I mean, they'll protect you. But if you're in the wrong and you're excessive use of force, you're on your own. The state will turn away and throw you to the wolves.
And that's every agency. That's not just the state that we're in. That I don't know of an agency that if you violate policy and law that they still will stand behind you. I don't know of one. Not to say
Yeah,
they're not out there, but I'm just not aware of any. You know, and Robbie makes a good point though. Anything you do can land you in court. Trust me. Uh, I came close to a few times that it was innocent. You know, uh, But that's a whole different episode of,
Yeah.
fuck ups that land you in court, whether intentional or not. But yeah.
So yeah, so I mean that's kind of the ins and outs of cell extractions. There's not a whole lot to know except pure violence is, I mean, at the end of the day is what it is and what has
Violence!
to. Yeah, and usually you're running in with after the room's been gassed, so then you're having issues breathing and seeing and
That, Robbie, that right
so
there, of course, I got to tell a story. Every episode, it's, I always like to tell funny stories because most of my stories are funny, especially now after the fact. You said that, running into gas at the sheriff's office. I don't know if this would be considered a cell extraction or not. I mean, he got pulled out of the cell nonetheless. This guy, he was hurting himself. Yeah, I think he was like beating his head against the cell door or whatever. And we told him to stop. We're going to put you in the restraint chair if you don't quit. Da, 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 da. Fuck you. Other pleasantries were exchanged. He called us number one a bunch, which that means middle finger, just so you may want. But anyway, my sergeant, I guess he forgot his OC that night. He pulled mine off my belt, sprayed this inmate opened the pie flap, sprayed him. Sergeant missed. I don't know how he did it, but anyway, we go in, and because I thought, because Robbie can corroborate this, most of the time when you spray an inmate in a cell, most of the time you'll shut the pie flap back at the cell door, let him stew for a minute or two, and then go in. I didn't work for the brightest sergeant at the time. Speaking of idiots in the field, he sprayed, went right in. I ended up getting more OC in my eyes than what the inmate did. Now, keep in mind, we're actively fighting this guy. Seriously, it was like, I was like this, walking Ray Charles trying to figure out where the wall's at. I mean, just being real. So, it was that bad, but we got him taken care of. But yeah, that was a fun day. I did cuss the sergeant afterwards, but
oh yeah, I mean it's not the first time, won't be the last time that ever happens.
yeah.
But and I guess we can kind of roll that into like arguments. Most of my issues, especially now as a little more seasoned officer, is most of my issues come from staff. Doesn't really come from inmates.
Yeah, don't you just love that?
And yeah, I don't know about you, but that's especially as you move up in rank. Unfortunately,
Yep. When I was at a higher rank, yeah, it definitely seemed that way. Definitely appeared that way.
well, I mean, and even in your first year of corrections, you're just a lot of those the quote unquote old heads.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like I don't know about you, but where I'm at, a lot of the officers they don't even want to know your name until after you've been there for a year.
Yeah,
And
I've had that.
That's just for the simple fact of how high the turnaround is.
Yeah, because they don't want to get to know you and then come to find out you're the shitty officer, you're weak, whatever.
Well,
And then
I
put that
wouldn't
extra
even
time in you.
man, I wouldn't even say that. It's just one of the simple facts of we build such a tight bond with everyone that we go in there with. I mean, because at the end of the day, whenever I step into a pod with another guy, I got to rely on that guy with my life.
Yeah, I get that.
Because if an inmate jumps on me and I'm fighting with that inmate, more than likely I'm not going to have a chance to call an officer needs assistance. I might be able to hit my body alarm button, but more than likely that second guy is going to be the one to have to call that code. And I've seen some people freeze up.
Yeah.
Whenever violent stuff starts to happen, that's your classic fight or flight.
Now I will tell you, you say that, and this is an honest thing of what I did, and I'm man enough to admit it, and I learned from it. There's only been one time in my career that I ever froze in my entire career, entire 5.5 years roughly in. I was at the sheriff's office, and one thing that we've not really talked about yet, but it plays in, is PREA. Inmates cannot consent and everything else. Well, at the sheriff's office, we had what's called a strip search room. We had one of the female deputies that I worked with was in this particular room with the female inmate strip searching her. She just came off the street. The arresting officer wanted her strip search due to drugs or something. I don't remember exactly why, but we ended up strip searching her. The officer calls officer needs assistance back there. I take off initially, but I get to that door and I stop. Because in my head, I'm thinking, PREA. Like, I can get charged with this. I can be charged as a sex offender if I go in here and see this woman naked. It didn't register in my brain that, fuck that, she's fighting one of my coworkers. May have to admit that all day long. My sergeant pulled me aside. He chewed my ass up one way and down the other. And I told him, why, because he asked me, why the fuck did you do that? Why the fuck, cuss me? And I explained to him why. And he said, okay. And he was very understanding. And he said, I understand why. From now on, officer assistance call, I don't give a shit if there's a fucking orgy going on in that room and a female deputy if anybody calls an officer's assistance, you go. We'll sort it out later. We know you ain't going in there and doing sexual unlawful things. You're trying to save your coworker, which is more important.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why, like stories like that is why I feel like this type of platform is needed, because there's times. Oh, and y'all, sorry about the bark. I got my little sidekick with me today. She's up back behind me. But I mean, it's so important to have that base of knowledge from people, just a random thoughts, to where, because you're going to be put in situations to where you don't even think to ask, and other officers don't even think to tell you the situations.
Yeah.
So that's why I think this is going to be so important and so vital, and will help even officers that have been in this line of work for several years.
Yeah. Robby, I've had people already, like we talked about off camera and stuff. I've had a lot of positive feedback from current and former correctional professionals alike. And it's been very well received. Everybody says we are very informative. They like what we're doing. They're very thankful for what we're doing, because it needs to be done.
Yeah, and I'll say something. One of my hopes for the future of this, and I hope that we can make it happen, is I want to have other guest speakers on from other states, from other. I wouldn't mind having a couple cops on to share the similarities, and the ins and outs of it. But I really want to be able to have other staff members, maybe some friends, maybe people that we don't know. So if anybody's interested in coming on, feel free to reach out to us and we'll set something up.
Yeah, most definitely.
That's definitely one of my hopes for the future of this podcast and just future videos. And I say podcast, but we're putting it out everywhere. We're putting it on YouTube, podcasts. That's why we're recording it too.
Yeah. And I mean, guys, if you're out there and you're either in the corrections field, you used to be in the corrections field, or you're thinking about jumping into some form of correction, something related to the corrections field, like Robby said, reach out to us, ask us questions, and maybe, just maybe, I'm not going to 100% nail this down, we might be able to get you on here as a guest and we can talk, and maybe you can bring insight and wisdom to this platform that Robby and I just don't know, or we didn't think about, or whatever. This platform is not about us as much as it is about the profession itself and bringing light to this redheaded stepchild of law enforcement.
I mean, and that's something else to touch on. If for y'all thinking of joining this line of work, the first person, they better hope I'm not there if someone says that we're not a part of law enforcement or we're not first responders, and because they're full of shit. I can be firsthand that working in corrections, you are more than likely going to encounter a whole lot more violence than any police officer working on the street, because every time you come face to face with one of your offenders, they are violent people. That is what they're there for.
More times than not,
And anybody that says, that someone already made a comment about oh, it's just, two, I think it was tales of two guys that didn't make the police academy. That probably came from somebody that's been in jail before and he didn't like how he was treated.
Yeah, because the inmates love to call us rent-a-cops or Paul Blart, stuff like that. So, which is nowhere near the case. I've met a lot of corrections professionals, and I myself included, that tried to leave corrections and go to patrol. That didn't make it. It wasn't like, for me, it wasn't that I didn't make it in the police academy. Is I didn't interview the greatest. And looking back, I am thankful that God kept me out of that. And I was able to stay in corrections because I feel like I had a much more fulfilling career in law enforcement, just being in corrections than being on patrol. So,
yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff that is different from like being, because I've worked at the sheriff's office and a little more public.
Yeah,
there's so much differences of public versus behind the walls, and you have to act different. You have to be a little more, and just be flat out honest. After you've spent a few years working in corrections, it's hard to work anywhere else.
Oh, good God. Yeah. My wife works in retail, and she has told me that we were joking at one point about about me potentially going to work in retail just for funsies. And she looked at me and she said, "Caleb, honey, I love you, but I hate to break your heart. You can't tell a customer to go fuck themselves, and you can't tell the customer they're going to put them in the hole for 30 days. You can do it once, then you'll be out of retail. That much I promise you." And I said, "Well, that's okay. I'll take your word for it." She said, "Oh yeah, and by the way, you can't call your coworkers fucking morons, even into their faces."
Yeah, that happens a lot. But it's just, yeah. I mean, the toll that it takes. I mean, this job, it changes you, but it also, I mean, if you keep your head on right, it'll change you for the better.
I do got to make this joke because we touched on the differences between patrol and corrections and everything else, about two guys not being able to make it to police academy. This is my favorite joke of all time as far as corrections goes. God made corrections officers because he knew cops needed superheroes too. So to the guy that made that comment, buddy, we didn't have to fill out of it. We just wanted to be superheroes to the police officers. And my police officer audience, guys, it's just a joke. It's that brotherhood. It's that family teasing back and forth. One of the jokes I've heard from a police officer, the only reason why corrections officers are even successful, their favorite word is trustee.
Yeah, well, and any of those guys that are worried about, are we going to be viewed as law enforcement? I tell you what, the only people I care if we're viewed to law enforcement are, our brothers and sisters that are out there in law enforcement. And if you want to be proven that, go up and ask a cop. Do you consider people that work in prisons and jails law enforcement? And a 99% of them will say that's a job that I would never do.
What's funny is I was talking to a trooper. It was kind of a forced conversation because he decided to pull me over. But he asked me, do I work anywhere? I don't know why that conversation. I can't control why he said that, but he asked me, and I said, yes, sir. And I told him that I was a corrections officer and where I worked at. And he said, you got your work ID on you? And I said, yes, sir. And I handed it to him. I just happened to have it on me because I always kept it in my vehicle. That way I'd never lose it. And I handed it to him, and he looked down at it, and he said, corrections officer, huh? I said, yes, sir. He said, better you than me. Go on. Like, I don't just quit speeding and go on. Like, okay, hey, bye.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of
take that away from us.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, especially after long 16-hour shifts, most of the time whenever I get pulled over, it's usually after long shifts like that.
Yeah, you're just trying to rush to get home. You're tired.
Yeah.
You stink. You got inmate gunk on you. Essentially, sometimes you get other person's bodily fluids. Been there, done that. Not so fun.
So I feel like we've touched on a lot of firsts, and
oh yeah.
And again, guys, if especially you new officers out there, if you run across this and there was some firsts that you came across that you don't know if you handled it right, or if you maybe want some advice on, feel free to reach out.
Hit us up in the comments.
And I promise you, if I don't know, I know enough people I can find out for you.
And I'm the same way, guys. I know I'm no longer in the field anymore, but I've still got a lot of connections, a lot of good friendships that are still established. I mean, Robby is a prime example. Him and I met in corrections, and even though I've left, we are still good friends. I mean, that's my brother through and through, and I've got plenty more just like him that are very intelligent, very knowledgeable.
Yep, so I think we're going to end it here. And like I said, if any of y'all have any questions, I'll put our email down in the description so y'all can reach out to us.
Yeah. Yeah, guys, don't hesitate to do that. And we look forward to hearing from every last one of you. Thank you guys for your support as well. You guys are really helping us grow, and we're very thankful.
So until next time, guys.